Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 50th anniversary virtual reunion of Blue Water White Death. I'm very excited to be able to have this opportunity digitally, in the virtual world, to bring people together during this time period where it's actually very difficult for folks to come together. It's a different time today in 2001. We're just very excited to be able to talk about a film that certainly moved me personally, and I wouldn't be on the path that I'm on currently, working with sharks and owning and curating Living Sharks Museum here in Westerly, Rhode Island, America's first shark history museum. We are showcasing artifacts detailing the story of the shark from all around the world. And it's also been my pleasure to share a virtual seat with shark experts and people who love sharks from all around the world through this platform, through this online platform. I'm very thankful. And today, I couldn't be more excited. We have the cast and crew of Blue Water White Death. For those of you who have never seen this film, I hope that you definitely go out and find a way to watch this film. As you may have read, this film did pave the way for not only Jaws, but the future of marine science in the world of the shark. I know personally many folks who got into the shark sciences because they were inspired by this film. This was also one of the first films to feature sharks filmed underwater, which definitely opened up a whole new area for cinema scientists, which is a very common term used today. Divers who are able to capture underwater footage of marine life and share it with the world with today's technology. Back then, technology was different. We're talking about 1971 and prior. I'm hoping some of the folks that we have with us today will talk about some of that technology and how it's changed and what made their lives so interesting during this particular expedition. Blue Water White Death was filmed as an expedition put together by Peter Gimbel. It was a 6-month expedition. About 12,000 miles were covered in search of the great white shark. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce to you all the folks we have today. I'm going to bring on Mr. Peter Lake.
Howdy.
Hello, Peter.
Hello.
Mr. Stuart Cody.
Very good.
Welcome.
Evening. Thank you.
Tom Chapin.
Hello, everybody. Nice to be with you.
And of course, Mr. Rodney Fox.
Hi from Australia.
And the great Nick Caloyianis.
Howdy.
Welcome, everyone. Now, we're very fortunate to have you here. All of you played very distinct roles in this film, some behind the scenes and some after. You all have individual relationships with each other, which I hope we'll get a chance to talk about, and how this movie affected your career. The first thing I really wanted to talk about was, what did you all know about white sharks before this project embarked? And I'll direct that question initially to Peter Lake.
Absolutely nothing. I got involved because I had been in the jungle with Peter Gimbel, and he asked me if I would go along and photograph sharks with him, but I knew nothing about them at all.
And how about you, Stuart?
Well, I spent 4 years in the Navy. I worked on fighter jets, and I was stationed in Key West during the Cuban crisis. And in my off time, I managed to actually secure a night job. In my off time during the day, I would go snorkeling and diving around the Keys. And the first time I saw a tiny little 2-foot sand shark at Pompano Beach, I just made it for the shoreline as fast as possible. So I was completely afraid of sharks to begin with. That's about it as far as I could say.
How about you, Tom?
I knew very little about sharks. The way I got into the film was that Jim Lipscomb, the great surface photographer and documentarian, was a great friend of my brother Harry's, who was also working in documentaries there. Our uncle was Richard Leacock of Leacock Pennybaker, someone did the Monterey Pops and a bunch of great documentary films. So every time Harry would flunk out of school, he'd get a job with Uncle Ricky. and when he's doing that, he met Jim Lipscomb, and they did a bunch of stuff together. And Jim, we were going to play tennis up here in the Hudson Valley. One day we got in the boat on the train from New York up to Jim's house. And on the way, he's trying to convince Harry, my brother Harry, to go on this shark hunt. And I'm sitting there going, I want to do this. I want to do this. Harry turned it down. He had 2 other jobs and several girlfriends, and he didn't want, it was so I eventually got the job. I'd never dived before, but I was I was an athlete and I started working for Peter Gimbel and in that crazy place on 62nd Street with all the equipment. And after working for him for a couple of weeks, he asked me to go along, and I said yes.
He said, "Bring your guitar."
No, he didn't. I brought the guitar, and nobody expected that the music would be in it. But Jim was always, willing to try stuff, and he would film me in various odd places, singing, and all of a sudden it ended up making the movie. It was really amazing.
How about you, Rodney?
Well, I'd probably had more experience than everybody on the trip, because I was dragged into the world of great white sharks in 1963 when I was badly bitten around the chest by a great white shark. And in hospital, I noticed that there was an incredible fear and a hatred towards sharks. They were incredible. They were up there with hell and devil and death, and sharks was sort of the unknown fear that a lot of people had. And so it was during the period just after that, I was at the Adelaide Zoo, and I actually saw the lions in the cage, another man-eater, and the lion roared at that stage with a roar that started down by its tail and went up through its body and out through its mouth and sounded like, the devil himself. And I thought, wow, there really are a man-eater. And then I saw there was water, a moat around the bottom of the particular lion's cage. And I put 2 and 2 together, and man-eater and cage and water. And I thought, maybe I can reverse the role. I'll get in a cage. I'll put it in the water by where there's lots of sharks, and I'll actually get in, have a look to see whether or not I want to go back diving again, because I really love to dive. And that's how sort of my cage diving started. And we'd already made 3 films by the time that Blue Water White Death came. And so I was really a bit miffed in the early days when I wasn't invited to go on this wonderful trip through the Indian Ocean and on a great big, on a grand adventure, which it truly proved to be. So I was quite pleased that I got asked in the end to try and find some great white sharks to finish the film.
That's incredible. And as you can all see, Valerie Taylor is with us. Her mic is now unmuted, and she can join us.
Hi, Valerie.
Stories. Everybody say hello. Valerie, thank you.
Hi, Tom. Hello, Stuart.
Hi, Valerie.
I'm sure you just heard Rodney's story. We've been going around the room talking a little bit about our experiences with sharks prior to going on this expedition. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience?
Well, there's a lot to tell. And Ron and I worked with sharks right from the late 1950s because Ron was a cinema photographer, and sharks sold. They sold very well. And Movico News used to buy our early black and white footage and blow it up to 35 mil and send it into the theatres around the world. And that really put us up there with sharks. And I remember Rod saying, well, I've made my first shark film, that's done. Here we are still making them 50 years later. And the latest one is about me. It was accepted into Sundance, and all of a sudden this shark thing just started again. And yeah, I was so amazed seeing my old time shipmates there. And I'm delighted to be here. And I mean, I have made a very good living with sharks. I now paint them. And I think one of my sharks might be on the Opera House sales as an image for a couple of nights. And I'm still going. I'm still going very fast, very hard.
This is the picture Valerie took in Life magazine. I don't want to get the wait a minute, to get it right. There you go. That was Valerie's picture featured in the Life magazine story about blue water white cat. Walter Cronkite on the cover.
Oh, thank you, Peter.
Great picture.
And I want to ask Nick if you'd be so kind to tell us a little bit about Mr. Peter Gimbel, of course, the man of the hour.
Well, yeah, of course, everybody knows that, I was not part of this expedition. I was actually a student of Dr. Eugenie Clark. That was my introduction to Peter Gimbel eventually. While Valerie and Rodney and Peter and Tom and Stuart, when everyone was, going around on that chase, I was still an undergraduate student at University of Maryland, and I met Peter about a year after Blue Water White Death came out. I was just near graduation at University of Maryland, and I had no clue as to whether or not I was going to ever be a filmmaker. I thought I was going to have a career as a marine biologist, as a shark biologist, but Peter was one of the guys who inspired me. He was an incredible person to work with. I had the great pleasure of working with him off and on close to a year on his last Andrea project in 1981. But we were friends for a while, right up until the time he passed in 1987. And, I sometimes I feel like, I'm one of the ones carrying the torch for this. I helped relocate the original 35 millimeter footage for Blue Water White Death. It was all kind of accidental. And Valerie knows some of the story because she knows Jim Packer, who used to be the president of MGM. So I got connected with Jim a long while ago, and eventually we found the footage.
Wow.
Hence the DVD. The material was digitized, and 35 millimeter anamorphic negative still looks great. It's locked in a safe place in Los Angeles right now in a vault.
Wow. Great.
That's great. And Peter managed to get you all to come together on this expedition to look for the shark that Rodney knew where it was. But we were going to follow this exciting adventure to follow the trail of the dead whale. But there was some confusion there because the locals were referring to a different shark. Is that true, Valerie?
That is very true. When the oceanic white tips came up to feed on the whale, the crew on the whale catcher were yelling out, "Great white shark, white shark." We all rushed to look, and it was a bit of a disappointment. Ron and I, right from the beginning, were telling him if he wanted white sharks, Australia was a good place to go. And but he had already done his homework on the Indian Ocean. So we set off looking for great white sharks, and it was the greatest adventure of my life and Ron's, going to these far-flung islands, diving in all sorts of weird and wonderful places. And we all owe it to Peter Gimbel and his belief that great white sharks existed off was then Ceylon, now Sri Lanka. And all the time, Ron was saying, well, I know where you can find them, Peter. And Peter didn't listen. And suddenly, right at the end, he decided to come to Australia. All the time, Ron was wanting to go to South Africa, to the tip of South Africa. Eventually, we did go. We were working for the Natal Sharks Board, and the sharks in South Africa are big pussycats. We didn't have a cage, and we had 5 great whites swimming around us. And we shot the film for the Natal Sharks Board. And when we got out, Ron said, why didn't we bring the Terrier 8 down here? And I think maybe it was just safe for Ron and I to go down there and do it. Beat all those sharks. But it wasn't an adventure like working with Peter and Stan and living on the Terrier 8. That was a true adventure. Cannot be done today. Those sharks don't exist today. I went back to the Indian Ocean 4 years ago. We baited, we couldn't find a single shark, not even a reef shark, nothing. That's what finning does. That's what shark fin soup can do. All those hundreds of sharks gone.
Wow.
We were following a whaling vessel too that was actively whaling. See if you can see this here. This was a. Let me get this. I've got too much glare here, but this was a dead sperm whale. We followed off of South Africa, and the thought was that great white sharks would be attracted to the whale.
Part of this project that made it so entertaining, I think, to all of us who enjoy it so much, was the format of the cinema verite, and the fact that everything was shot, no matter what was happening. And I was hoping that maybe Peter could tell us a story, perhaps, about how cinema verite made things very dangerous for many of you.
Well, Stuart holding up Jim Lipscomb and his 35 millimeter Harry. We had a special process called Technoscope that allowed us to double the amount of time a film magazine reported underwater, and also let us use wider angle lenses. So it's really a terrific technique. It gave us great photography. Lipscomb had to carry around this 50, 60 pound camera, and Tom would be helping him from the whole thing. It was quite a thing, quite a feat of photography, and Lipscomb was terrific in doing this. And we're on his way ship, and he's holding this camera off balance, and actually it was bigger than this one. This one doesn't have a blimp on it, and the active camera we used mostly for sound was even bigger and heavier than this one. And also the underwater cameras were in very large houses too, developed by well, I don't know, did Al develop them or stuff? Here he is with the big blimp. And Stuart, his dog run, weighed about 90 pounds too. And it was quite a feat of engineering for these guys to work on a ship. There were only 9 of us making this film. Now you look at it, the credits on a film, and it goes into the hundreds of people.
It was interesting being, when I first got on, I was sort of the extra man, and then Stuart Cody had so much other stuff to do to wire the ship, the Terrier 8 down in South Africa, and also fix cameras and stuff. And so I ended up, Jim kind of grabbed me and said, "You're going to be the sound man." And then And the first day, I messed up. I did something where I forget what exactly, but and Jim, instead of nailing me, he pulled Stuart and sat me and Stuart down. He said, "Stuart, he can't do this. You're going to have to do this." And I'm going, "I can do it. I can do it. You got to do it." You know, and that was the last time I made a mistake. And he was a tough taskmaster. And the other thing about Jim said early on when I started doing the sound, and especially when the divers were down with the heavy sharks and stuff, he says, "Listen," and it happened, and they had a discussion in the film about this, which is amazing. But he said, if we're filming and something's going on, you make sure you get the sound and make sure we get the picture. And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, your job is to take the sound, not to go and help them." And okay, you know, and I'm 24 or something. I said, "Okay," and
that shows up in the film as well.
It does, but it was a really interesting thing about a dangerous job that was going on all around us. That was diving with all those sharks around this dead whale, and there was thousands of sharks. It's unbelievable. And then other places when we were on the seamount, and there was this huge tide run. And you guys, the divers came back, and the boat is going like this, boom, 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 and you say, "Help, help!" And there's none of the crew was there.
Where's
Jim and I are there, and I start to go over to help, and Jim grabs my shoulder and pulls me back, and we just we filmed it, and of course it's in the film later on. This Stan Waterman saying, "Did you get the right f-stop, Tom?" What? You know? And so it was really an interesting thing. That's the cinema verite question. You know, it's like filming during war. You know, and some of that it might have been that dangerous. You know, and when we talk about the excitement of this, it was a once in a lifetime event, and being part of it was just astonishing, and watching the bravery and the talking about whether they're going to get out of the cage and with and all that stuff was really a big question. And so that's part of what makes the film magical, I think, is watching that happen.
Valerie, can you share with us your emotions and feelings that you had before and after stepping out of the cage?
Absolutely. I've actually written about it. I was one of the 4 divers, and Peter said, I thought we could get out of the cage. The sharks were now becoming accustomed to us. And he said, if you bump them before they bump you, or immediately after they bump you, they'll get respect. And Ron agreed. Stan was hesitant, and I knew that I would do whatever Ron and Peter wanted me to do. I don't have this fear of sharks that most other people have, or I couldn't have led the life I do. The thing that frightened me the most was that in the seamount, I'm screaming for help, and there's a cameraman and a soundman watching. Stan is screaming for help. He's on the ladder. I'm hanging onto the side of the ship, going right down and coming up. Just as well I was young and strong. I would have drowned. That was the worst moment for me in the whole thing, and it had nothing to do with sharks. And to this day, I'm very respectful of currents and a big swell. They're the killers, not the sharks. People are afraid of sharks. I mean, there's approximately 300 species in the world, and maybe 6 of them are potentially dangerous to the human in the water. But we went out there and proved that people could swim with sharks. Something like this had never been shot again. And I want to say this very loudly. It can never be done again, ever. The sharks have gone. The whaling in the Indian Ocean has stopped. And it's now a whale sanctuary. And that's another story. But I'm grateful to everybody there, everybody who was involved in the film, the coloured crew. It was just How lucky can you be? How lucky can you be? Yes, Stuart, where are you?
So this particular film showcases the use of a shark cage, and while it wasn't the first time a shark cage had been used, it was certainly maybe the first time the world was seeing it. And given this new fascination with sharks, it's incredible to see that shark tourism has become an amazing substitute for fishing the shark and killing the shark. It's a wonderful way to move forward in protecting sharks. I was hoping that Nick could tell us a little bit about Peter Gimbel's cage. As I understand it, he was very particular about his cage, and in fact had spent quite a few years perfecting it.
Yeah, Keith, Gimbel has a long history with shark cage development. He started probably a good 7 or 8 years before Blue Water White Death, and experimented with cages. Had a few bad things happen in quarries, where when he originally put the he originally had like beer kegs, and I have pictures of all this, but I didn't bring them. That were serving as ballast tanks, and he found out quickly that he needed a sophisticated system for electronically controlling all this. And Peter actually has a patent out. I have these cages, and they work really well. The one's in a museum in Chattanooga at the Tennessee Aquarium. I have one here in Baltimore, but they're wonderful in that they're not too complicated. And believe it or not, to this day, there still isn't anything that I've seen better. But they are a bit to handle, and a bit of maintenance involved. But in true Gimbel fashion, I mean, these things were solid. They work really well. When Peter Gimbel died, his wife Elga kind of put me in charge of these cages, and they had been basically in mothballs, so to speak, since I guess 1971 or so. We opened them up in the early 90s, I think somewhere around 1991 or 1992, and they were in perfect condition. I think Stuart Cody was there. I think the only thing we did, Stuart, was probably change the batteries, and they just worked great.
Right. His patent is called the diver's elevator, in case you want to look it up.
The cages were very, very strong.
Like this is a picture of the cave where a shark had been tugging a bit on it when I was in it. And much to the amusement of Peter Gimbel and everyone, is the shark had bent in bars and pulled them out. But nevertheless, and the other picture I wanted to show you was our friend Rodney Fox. This is why Rodney, probably the best thing that ever happened to him, but probably didn't seem that way at the time. What you have, like 5,000 stitches, Rodney?
Yes, I think so. That's the best picture that has given me 5-star hotel accommodation, and I've been dining with princes and with billionaires, and has taken me around the world. So thank goodness the doctors took that picture on the operating table. They actually said to me, we took it because if you had died, we would have had a quick look at it later and find out where we went wrong. So it was a great picture, really.
Well, really.
The interesting thing about my involvement with it is just I wasn't on that wonderful trip through the Indian Ocean, and it really, as Valerie described, the trip of a lifetime. And I was actually very jealous of everybody going off and looking in different places in the Indian Ocean. And one thing that always stays with me is Tom singing those wonderful songs in the film. I always get the picture. I don't watch the film. Is how did you get on with your neck cringe while you were trying to sit on the bunk there for so long, playing those songs with your neck? And that one thing that stayed with me.
Well, Jim thought it was a funny song, so I should be uncomfortable singing it. So it was not my idea to sit there like this on the thing. Often, very often I'd be up on deck and find, because I was down in a little place right down. It wasn't a large place. I couldn't stretch out on the bed, 6'5", and the bed was 6'2", and so. But I remember all this stuff. I'm going where those chilly winds don't blow. And just all these songs that he filmed me singing, which is funny. That they ended up being the soundtrack for the film, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, that's one of the things I really do enjoy. And where you're singing about the beauty and the wonder of the ocean and the chilly winds and the warm seas and the palm trees, and you're sitting there all uncomfortable, it was sort of an anomaly.
Let me stick in a comment here. If we had gone right directly to Dangerous Reef, you guys, we would have had a 15-minute film. The whole idea, Gimbel knew where he knew he could get it at that point, but he wanted to have an adventure in the meantime. So off we went to Madagascar and Mozambique and Wanda Nova and Durban and all that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Europa.
there you go.
And Ceylon, unbelievable. Yeah, I remember traveling through Ceylon, which is now Sri Lanka, and going up to Kandy. And had nothing to do with the ocean, but
but Valerie got a chance to feed an elephant, or at least pet the thing, and maybe ride on it, right?
Yeah, I rode it. Yes.
Yeah.
And I think you came with me, didn't you, Tom? Didn't you come with me?
Yeah,
we were all there. We were all there.
And the fruit bats and the working elephants, and it was just amazing adventure. And then every day out in is it Colombo? What was the boat that was off?
Hermes.
What was it?
Oh yeah, and those crazy
Hermes,
right?
Yeah.
And going out in those fishing boats out to where the Terrier 8 was docked, and I got the worst sunburn on my thighs I've ever had in my entire life, sitting in the boat waiting for you guys to come up.
Food?
Huh?
What about that hotel food? That was so hot that I had to eat on the boat, regardless of that chef, that cook we had. That cook was a real rascal.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that cook we
Case,
had
that was his name, Case.
Oh boy.
Yeah, he was a bad man. He was a cruel, bad, evil man. Yeah.
He could pull out of my car in South Africa. He was with women of a mixed race and questionable morals, and the police won't stop my car and pull them out.
Oh,
they were pulling him out for giving us those terrible meals, but no, it was something. There was something else I wanted to mention too. When we were in the middle of the ocean, a great event occurred, the landing on the moon. And I remember being on deck that night and looking at the moon and thinking, well, that's okay, but they're missing a good time. We're having a better time.
Wow, yeah.
Wow, he's right.
I remember also in Ceylon, one of the crew members was, as they called it then, Cape Colored. And his trial was coming up in South Africa, as to whether he's going to be this is the talk about the racial stuff that was going on. It was a mixed race crew. The captain was Dutch or
Norwegian.
Norwegian, yeah. And and in South Africa you could appeal your race, and I forget his name, but his trial was coming up. So they shipped him back to South Africa, and that meant that we had to be some of the crew members. And I remember I remember one night. I mean, it was not just one night, but you on from 4 a.m. to 8 a.m. and you're steering the boat, and Jim Lipscomb and I are there, out there, and in the middle of the night, and seeing the Southern Cross, the whole this amazing in the middle of the ocean, and the sky went right down to the ocean. These incredible stars. And one night there was an albatross who came and landed on the up on the what do they call it? The view on top of the mast. There was a place that they would view, and there was an albatross up there. And I said, Jim, I'm going to catch that albatross. And Jim goes, "You're going to what?" I said, "I'm going to go up there and catch that albatross." And he says, "No, you're not. No, you're not." Anyway, I started up. He goes, "What will I tell Harry when I fall off or die? What am I going to tell Harry?" Anyway, I got up there, and it was like a little place you could just sit in there, and there's the albatross, which is the size of 12-foot wingspan, and the head, it's like a super seagull. Anyway, I get up there, and then suddenly the albatross goes and flies off, and I get in. Albatross comes right back, and I remember Ron said he was more afraid of the albatrosses in the water than he was of the sharks, because they were big birds. And anyway, I'm sitting there. I go, what am I doing here? This is ridiculous. And this bird is sitting above me, not aware that I'm there. And they're the size of their body's the size of a toilet bowl, and their head is the size. Anyway, I finally decided. I leaned back, and two legs. I went bang, and I hit the bird, and I climbed quickly down. I went, that was really stupid, young man. But that was what. It's a silly little moment, but it was what that whole adventure was like. It was. I mean, I'm in my early 20s, and being with the divers and everybody on the trip was astonishing for me in terms of how you live a life and make choices to do something that you really love and want to. Peter Gimbel was that way. Jim Lipscomb was that way. Stan Waterman and the Taylors and all of us. I mean, Peter Lake's still doing what he loves, the photography, and Stu Cody as well. The whole crew it was an amazing thing to be part of, really was. And everybody worked, I came back, and I didn't go back to Australia, because I came back and said, I really want to do music, And so Jim actually tried to talk me into going. He says, if you want to be in documentaries, you need to go to the end of this. And I said, it was amazing, but I'm going to do music, and that's what I've done ever since. But
and you went on to have a TV show.
A TV show very quickly, and then and I've had a career of pretty good career for a folk singer on a boat.
Tell us all how this expedition changed each of your lives, Peter.
Well, I went from this movie to Deep, and I was a production executive on the Deep, and everything I had done on the water really helped. I had spoken to Steven Spielberg before he did Jaws, and cautioned him about working on the water, and these were cautions that they ignored, and tripled their budget. But the movie was a great hit. But on the Deep, we were able to bring the movie in almost exactly on budget, and that was a wonderful experience. But you have to have worked on the water, under the water, to understand the special demands of filming on the water. It's just 10 times harder than doing a regular movie.
And Stuart, tell us a little bit about your contribution to this film and how your career moved on.
Well, I was a nuts and bolts guy. I'm an engineer. I love working with artistic people, and that's what I was right where I wanted to be. But I have to tell you how I was recruited into this movie. And that is that I was sitting in the airport in Ethiopia, Addis Ababa, flying down to a very remote spot where there was only one flight a week. And I looked across the waiting room in the airport, which was very modest indeed. And I saw a couple of Europeans. And I stared at them and they stared at me. Finally, I went over and I was asked by the cameraman, they had a camera, yes. And we're looking at Jim Lipscomb and Harry Chapin. They were making a film about the World Bank. And so we introduced ourselves and we exchanged contact information. And Jim turned to Harry and he said, have you got the film magazines? And Harry said, I thought you had them. And he said back to Harry, I guess they're on the kitchen table. So at that point, they got up and aborted their trip down to the southern part of Ethiopia. That was that. But I got to meet Jim, and a few months later, I was off of the job, which involved desert trekking. We were making a movie about Ethiopian nomads with Harvard University. And I got back home and the phone rang and it said, somebody said, this is Jim Lipscomb. We're working on a shark movie. It's going to be all over the world. And are you interested? I said, you bet I am. After a desert movie, I'm ready for the water. So I was taken down. I was shipped down to New York and I met Gimbel. And the one thing I said that sealed the deal was I told him I could fix anything. And so I got hired. I worked with Gimbel on other films as well, and I was very, very happy to be working with this guy. He was a wonderful guy to work with. How did it change me? I wound up starting my own company, and that nailed my feet right to the dirt here in Boston. Once I had a dozen employees, I couldn't go to the bathroom without asking permission.
I have to tell a story about Stuart. I flooded a camera, a special wide lux panoramic camera, and just as I was starting a dive, then I ended it up, completed the dive, and when I came back, Stuart had the camera apart all over his bed, and I said, Stuart, have you ever taken one of these apart before? And he said, no, but I always wanted to.
Yeah. Of course, it was fun. What was there to lose?
Yeah, I'd like to say something too. His reputation followed it down to Australia too, because he was known on our trip how he was the guy who could fix anything. And over the years, I've always thought if you're ever going to hire somebody, you've got to hire somebody like Stuart who can actually do a little bit of everything and not complain, but just go ahead and fix it. So your reputation has followed me over the years through my thoughts of and all the films we've been involved in.
Oh, that's very sweet to hear, Rodney. Very sweet to hear. But you've forgotten that the one complaint I had was with the laundry. When we were in Ceylon, I complained to the production manager that we weren't able to consolidate our laundry. And that brought up a big fight. We had a big fight. As a result, the production manager didn't appear in the Australian version of the film. They left him at home. I don't think it was me. I think it was the budget. We had to raise another $800,000 to go to Australia.
Yeah. And you did, and just as well, because that was the grand finale of the entire film. And I can remember afterwards, about 2 years afterwards, getting the galley proofs of a book called Jaws, and a guy called Richard Zanuck and David Brown, there were two men, asking us to read it and see if it would make a good movie. And we read it and wrote back, and we were thinking work for the Taylors actually, and said, yes, it'll make a great movie. And that movie, of course, was Jaws. So that came out of Blue Water White Death. Blue Water White Death came out of, for Ron and I, out of a documentary, an hour-long documentary called Ron and the Great White Shark, which was shot and produced by Bruno Bellati, who was an Italian film director. It was made for Italy. So everything was connected to everything. And of course, we went on to work on all those Hollywood films, all from Blue Water White Death, really.
Yeah, well, Gimbel was such a great salesman. He had such great charisma. None of us would have had any success without him selling the thing. He could sell that film easily. He did.
Yes.
And he was reluctant to spend his own money on this film, although he could have financed the whole thing. He wanted other money to come in and pay for it. That's a lesson right there.
I know. I asked him about that because Stan Waterman told me he was very wealthy. He gave me a gift, and it was in a Saks off Fifth Avenue box. And I said, "Oh, Stan, I can't have this. It's too expensive." And he said, "Oh, don't worry, he owns the shop." And I thought, "Oh, well." And then I said to Stan, why doesn't he get the extra money he wants out of his own wallet or out of the bank or something if he's that wealthy? And this is what Stan said. He said, Peter wants to prove to his father that he can do something of his own by himself and be successful. And I thought,
his father was dead by then, you know.
I know he was dead by then. But Pete, that's what Stan said to me. And, well, he did. I don't know who he proved it to. Maybe his son, who was in a bad way in Amsterdam at the time, I think, something like that. But it all happened because, for Ron and I, because of a film called Ron and the Great White Shark. The only thing that they missed was the fact that the Great White Shark was in South Australia. Thank goodness. Because as Ron said, we'd have never gone to all those places. We'd have never learned as much as we did if we'd just gone to South Australia. We'd been down there many times and we had worked with the Great White Sharks with Rodney. But going down there to make the final shots for this incredible film that was just sort of happened. I'll say this for Jim, he never asked anybody to do anything. He was always in your face with that camera. I'd rather was frightened to go to the loo in case I looked at the porthole and there he was with his camera. It was like that. He did a terrific job. And
here's one more picture.
Oh, yes, there we are. That's South Australia.
Yeah.
There we are.
Sorry.
Yes.
I was very
You're in the
fortunate.
water, Go ahead.
I was very fortunate recently to look through my files and I found the Blue Water and White Death file that I had made there. And it's got some interesting things. In those days, you were talking, it was so many years ago. There were no telephones, no portable telephones, and we had to communicate by letter or post, telegrams, and I was working hundreds of miles out on the west coast, halfway to Perth, and the only phone that was around was a shop close by, was the cafe. And so I remember talking to Peter Gimbel by phone, trying to contact him, and of course, as it's so difficult during the days and the nights. But in this particular file, I found that I was paid $7.50 an hour for organising my side of things in Australia. And during the 6 weeks, I was paid $300 a week. So that was quite small. And I could have earned much more abalone diving at the time. But I was really keen to be part of an international big film. I had to find a suitable boat to try and get the whole film crew on. And of course, there were many suitable boats around, and I got a few quotes from tuna boats around at the time, and they were priced at over $10,000 a week because it was the middle of the tuna season. And so I managed to find a boat called the Saori, which was used for transporting explosives around the coast to the townships around South Australia. It was a 65-foot ketch, and we managed to get it for $300 a day, including the captain and the engineer. So that shows you how much things have changed. But it was really quite difficult to organise, because they had to fly in the cages and the cameras and the different things, and I had to organise the contracts and specifications to try and send back. The marine and harbours, I had to contact shipping agents, customs. There was a $40,000 security I had to put to bring all these strange things into Australia. And it was certainly, after I'd finished it, I realised, and you were saying, how did it affect you? But I realised that I could organise and handle fairly big jobs. I organised with the Port Lincoln Council, the mayoral reception, and everybody was given some fine caviar and Australian wines there. And I didn't know at the time that Stan was actually Stan Waterman, who was up to his great old self at this. He was talking to a very pretty girl. And 2 weeks after the expedition had started, we'd spent 5 days out, 1 day in, 5 days out, 1 day in. And after 2 particular 5-day trips with no sharks, there was huge amounts of stress. Everybody was unhappy. They didn't know what to do. They thought it was going to be a failure again. And we pulled into the wharf on that end of that 5-day period with a list of huge amounts of things to do, and to try and get lots and lots more extra bait to create more like a whale out there, hoping the sharks would come. And the cook had quit, and I had the flu, and I'm standing there thinking, God, there's a lot to do. And Stan Waterman bounces out of his cabin in absolute white tennis dress with a tennis. And I said, where are you going? He said, I'm off to play tennis with a debutante. And he danced around out with Stan, and he's always been the same. What a character. I do remember Stan was quoting, I think, from what was that film that he?
It must have been
what?
He was so good at coming up with appropriate quotes.
Yeah,
absolutely. He was the gentleman of the group.
Mr. Toad and all of his friends.
Oh, the Wind in the Willows.
Wind in the Willows. Oh God, they came out at the most amazing times, and so he stood out from all the others, but with his quotes from Wind in the Willows. Yeah,
man, my favorite was it's a time warp now, but I claim this land in the name of John Lindsay.
The mayor
who was the mayor of New York at that point.
One little thing I did do is I had to get 215 pounds of lead weights, because they didn't want to fly them in from America. And I bought them at 30 cents per pound at the time, and it was $74. Whereas today, the same amount would cost $1,041. So that shows you how much prices have increased over the 50 years.
Wow.
Oh, yeah.
Before we go, I wanted to mention one thing apropos of what Valerie was saying about her and Ron about with their film, and the poster picture for Blue Water My Death was taken by the Taylors previous to Blue Water My Death. In fact, this is a well-kept secret, don't tell anyone. But that wonderful picture of the shark with its jaw, I believe, was a frame from the 16mm film, wasn't it, Val?
That photograph was taken by Ron. He didn't have a cage. The first film he made on great white sharks. He did not have a cage, and he just hung over the back of the boat and filmed. But it worked out very well. I just want to say something about Rodney's wages. Some years later, we were working on Jules, and Ron wrote out a contract for to go and find the sharks, and Rodney was in it. And my contract, which I just found the other day, he was paid $350 a day, which shows how much his price jumped. And good for him. Everybody's price jumped at that stage. Yeah.
Yeah, they were for the filming in South Africa. I was getting $100 a week to swim around outside the cage with the sharks. And then they came back to me and they said, "Well, we're going to go to Australia and we're going to stay in the cage and we're going to pay you $200 a week." And I went, "Wait a minute."
Well, I remember one thing that Rodney's wife said: he was not to go in the water, period. Remember that, Rodney? You had to promise your wife you would not go in the water.
I don't think he did.
Yeah.
I've been in the cages quite a lot, but we were talking about free swimming with great white sharks and how some of them, and Valerie will view to this, is there are some sharks that you can see that they're just curious and interested and looking around, but then again, we've had quite a few great whites down there that you wouldn't want to get out of the cages with because they show a totally different temperament and are very, very hard to swim with. As a matter of fact, recently we had a person who was quite keen to swim with the sharks, although when we cage dive now, it's part of our policy and the government's policy not to let anybody free swim with the sharks. And there are some that you would never want to swim with.
Just like
Yes,
people.
they all have different personalities. The only time that Ron and I have been free swimming with great whites was in South Africa, or sometimes quite by accident in Australia. Our Australian great whites have different personalities to the South African great whites. Also, every great white has a different personality. Rodney just explained it. Some you can swim with and some you wouldn't want to get in the water with. And that's all sharks.
And blue water white death to me was a grand adventure. And it was something that I thought so many people would love to travel around the world looking for a specific animal. And it was really quite good. And I never ever thought it as a horror film. But last week, which is really fairly close to this particular broadcast, there was on a radio station, they were talking about horror films and what was the horror film. And one person rang up and said, Blue Water White Death was the worst horror film that I ever saw. Because I think what happens is when people view films, they view it at different times in their life. And also some people have interesting shark fears of sharks as well. And when Valerie and the others all got out of the cages and they were swimming, I think that's a fairly fearful thing, that you worry about these people's lives. And that was a particularly interesting thing and heart-rendering and heart-stopping thing for me when those Peter and the others all got out of the cage, and Stan and Ron, and those sharks were whizzing around them there by the dead whale. That was very special.
And doing it at night with the lights that Stuart had set up. Oh my gosh, swimming at night.
Whoa. Yeah, that was definitely
After
hairy.
the movie, there was an exploitation event where they were going to promote a fight between Willie Gibbons, I think his name was, and the Great White. This was a picture I took of the Great White. But, the headline here reads, "Man to fight 3,000 pounds Island great white shark. Slaughter of the century to be televised live.
Oh,
Death match.
Of course, we know as time has gone on, this film has found its place in cinema history, really cementing a positive view for the shark. And I'm amazed at the work that all of you have done to make that happen. And it's influencing so many people these days. And I'm excited to share this as well as the film with a new generation. And now with the internet and the ability to communicate with so many folks out there who desire to be shark advocates and really want to know where things began, we're very fortunate to have you all here with us. I wanted to acknowledge Peter Gimbel and Mr. Stan Waterman, who unfortunately couldn't join us tonight. And of course, Mr. Ron Taylor. And I wanted to close us out, hopefully, with a tune with Mr. Tom Chapin. There is one shark we wouldn't mind being in the sea with. I believe he is known as the chivalrous shark. Would you tell us a little bit about where this song came from and play us out, my friend?
Sure. Well, it's a song that I just knew, I was looking it up a couple of days ago, and the earliest thing, the earliest mention of it is from a book called "Nautical Lays of a Landsman" by Wallace Irwin. And so I always thought it was like a British, music hall song, and I happened to know it. And of course, Jim Lipscomb was the one who said, "You got to sing that shark song, and I want you to sit in your bunk so you're really uncomfortable." So I'm sitting like this, and it goes like this: the most chivalrous fish in the ocean, to the ladies forbearing and mild. Though his record be dark, the man-eating shark will eat neither woman nor child. He dines upon the sailors and skippers, and tourists his hunger assuage, and a fresh cabin boy will inspire him with joy if he's past the maturity age. A doctor, a lawyer, a preacher, he'll gobble one any fine day. But the ladies, God bless him, he'll only address them politely and go on his way. I always thought this song was perfect for Stan Waterman. I can readily cite you an instance where a lovely young lady from Bream, who is tender and sweet and delicious to eat, fell into the bay with a scream. She struggled and flounced in the water and signaled in vain for her bark, and she'd surely been drowned if she hadn't been found by the chivalrous man-eating shark. Here's the Stan Waterman part. He bowed in a manner most polished, thus soothing her impulse is wild. "Don't be frightened," he said, "I have been properly bred, and will eat neither woman nor child." Then he offered his fin, and she took it. Such gallantry none can dispute, and the passengers cheered as the vessel they neared, and a broadside was fired in salute. Well, they soon stood alongside the vessel, when a life-saving dinghy was lowered, with a pick of the crew and her relatives too, and a mate and the skipper aboard. And they hauled her aboard in a jiffy, while the shark stood attention the while. And then he raised on his flipper and ate up the skipper, and went on his way with a smile. It shows that the prince of the ocean, to the ladies forbearing and mild, Though his record be dark, the man in heart will eat neither woman nor child.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks so much, everyone. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Keith. Thank
Stay
you, Keith.
behind so we can chat afterwards, and we're going to sign off. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. I hope you had as much fun as I did. It's great to see everyone back together again and sharing their stories, many of which I haven't heard. It's great to see everyone also continuing to support sharks and advocating for sharks and conservation. And I hope you all feel so inclined to do the same. My name is Keith Cowley. I'm from Living Sharks Museum. And I want to thank everyone for coming. I want to thank Nick Caloyianis in particular for helping me put this all together. Without him, I wouldn't have been able to reach out to so many of these fine folks this evening. I hope you all come back again for our next interview in our series, In the Fighting Chair, which you can find on our website, livingsharks.org. I hope you all have a wonderful evening.